Hello, welcome back to 18th Century Cooking here at the Solomon Goffhouse Museum. Again today we have the lovely Chelsea who's going to do our cooking demonstration for us.
Hello everyone, as you know, I'm Chelsea from Bloody Historical, and I'm here to give you a really cool 17th century recipe on succotash. So it's actually a recipe that dates back to the Native Americans. The recipe I'm going to be using was first recorded in 1769 in Boston, but it dates back and was handed down by families to what they assume was the original Puritans and the first Thanksgiving. Succotash was actually a recipe that was served by the Wampanoag Indians originally, and there is no documentation of this recipe existing whatsoever in English settlers before the year 1600. So it's very interesting to study the history of this and what could have been the first Thanksgiving. Hopefully we'll be doing a cooking demonstration for you around Thanksgiving later this year that goes into much further detail into the research of this, but we're going to cook some succotash. So essentially it's a stew. And it uses things that were widely available at the time. So, for an example, potatoes, which we have here, turnips, here. This is corned beef, or salt pork is what they would have used at the time, or both. Salt pork was available on the ships. That's how they would have survived with meat. This is already combined, but this is hominy and white beans. So hominy was actually a dried corn, where they would take the corn kernels and dry them out, and then before they would cook it, sometimes they would soak it in water. And a lot of times this recipe wasn't something that they would just do in a day or in a few hours. It was actually something that took many days to complete. The other thing you need, of course, is your fowling. Now, according to William Bradford's record from the Puritan settlement, they went fowling the night before, or the day before, which meant hunting birds. Now, the idea of turkey in Thanksgiving came from that. However, there was no evidence that turkeys were actually available at that time. More likely it was ducks and geese. We are using chicken instead. However, you are welcome to use duck or goose. This recipe is also kind of nice because you can use different variables like add fish or seafood. It's pretty much just an everything stew. So they would take all these items and they would put them into a large pot and boil them. And a lot of times they would boil it for quite a few days, especially if they were using dried ingredients, so that way everything could soak. Luckily nowadays we don't have to worry about stuffing our stuff in barrels and bringing them across the ocean and having them survive with 5 tons of salt. And the other thing too is because we're not using stuff that was stored in barrels with a lot of salt, we could add a little salt if we'd like. I typically don't add salt to my recipes, and they wouldn't have added salt into their stews at the time, but it's something that we prefer nowadays, taste-wise. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna have our cauldron, and what we're gonna do is add all these ingredients to it. I put a little bit of water in the base of it, about, I don't know, a little less than halfway through, about a third full of water, and you can always add more if you'd like. You can also use oil and other things, but pretty much just put it all in. As I said, this is kind of a catch-all sort of stew. Oop, missed one. There we go. And of course you want to make sure this is nice and stirred up. Oop, this is settled. Luckily, as that's boiling, the corned beef will break up a little bit. I mean, if you do have canned items you're using and they're kind of chunked together, just make sure you break them up as you put them into the pot. Again, we have the privilege of having canned items that we can use. Here we go. And then lastly, our fowl. Now, I cut this into strips. You can always cut your fowling into more of a chunk. This is also a great dish for leftovers. I've made chicken and then had leftovers and used this style recipe to use up the leftovers. And then once you're done, this is going to be placed over the fire for quite a long time. I would say probably a few hours. The other thing that I've used this in modern cooking is a Dutch oven or a slow cooker. So slow cookers, I would put it on low and let it cook all day. Or if you're using a Dutch oven, put it in your oven 350 degrees for probably about an hour or so, and keep an eye on it. Or you could even boil it in the stove in a big stock pot. So we're gonna put this on our fire and see what happens. Thanks so much, guys.